Welcome everybody to the Center for Design Conversations series here. I have some slides I'll bring up in a minute, but we can start with just some brief introductions.
Sure.
So for those of you who don't know, I'm Mark Sivak. I am currently serving as the division head of creative media here in Art and Design. I'm also the director for the MS and XR Extended Realities program, and I'm jointly appointed with the College of Engineering, where I serve as the director of the MS and product development over there. And on the teaching side, I'm currently teaching for the GSMD, our Game Science and Design program. I'm teaching the kind of capstone and thesis courses over there. And then let me introduce my brother. So let me see if I can do this off the top of my head. So let's see. We both are Huskies. We both graduated from undergrad here in 2007, mechanical engineering. And then Seth went on to go to the Entertainment Technology Center at Carnegie Mellon, where he finished up in 2009 after doing an internship at Disney Imagineering. And then also one of the games he created while there was a IGF student finalist. And then he went on after graduation to work for a company over in Cambridge called Conduit Labs, making Facebook games, because that's what you did in 2009. And then from there, Conduit Labs was bought by Zynga, because they made even bigger Facebook games. And one of the big games that he was part of releasing was Indiana Jones Adventure World, which was a really awesome Facebook game. And then from there, he kind of worked his way up in Zynga to lead the Zynga Boston studio, which was then shut down in 2013?
October 2012.
2012. And then it was shut down at that point, and then him and four of his collaborators there started a new company called Proletariat, including another alumni from Northeastern who's our middle school friend / roommate, who now works in New York City. And then Proletariat carried on. It started with a game called Hug the Sloth, and then another game called Letter Rush, which were both for kind of iOS, iPad games. And then an iPad game, specifically tablet, was World Domination, which was kind of like a reverse tower defense, which was really cool. And they continued making other games, one kind of more for streaming called Streamline, and then the big release that they had was Spellbreak, which was kind of like a spell slinging battle royale game. And then in 2022, they were acquired by Activision Blizzard, basically a few months before it became public that Activision Blizzard was being acquired by Microsoft. And then since then, he's been doing some consulting and other stuff, which I don't know how much is public, so I'm not going to say anything else. So welcome to my brother. We have not done a talk on campus together, I think since the Zynga days. Well, because you came and gave a talk about Indiana Jones Adventure World at that point. So I have some slides, but overall format for what we're talking about here, I was going to kind of give an overview of what some of the trends. I've spent the last few weeks, it's gotten a lot weirder in the past week and a half, but I spent the last few weeks kind of going over all the data and everything about the industry right now, the state of it, the big trends and everything else. I have a bunch of notes, but what I essentially wanted to walk through was some of the things that we've seen, because obviously Seth and I talk all the time about this stuff, but to make this kind of more visible for everyone to kind of, ask questions, give your own comments or whatever it might be, have an actual conversation. So let me go ahead and bring up my slides.
Do you want Papa to? Yeah. Do you want to say something about the?
Oh yeah, sure.
To introduce. Good. Okay.
That's okay. Go ahead with the slides. I'm just happy, with my twin brothers, we never had a talk whatsoever.
You haven't? Maybe you
No,
should do it.
we tried, yeah. We now ended up after very different path towards education, architecture in my case, and economics, finance for him, management. Then data brought us like very close, but we didn't dare yet to have something like this.
In the meantime, thanks everyone for joining us online. I see more people joining, and thank you for making the time to come in person. Are you from Northeastern or?
Okay, I just live locally.
Okay, cool. Thanks for coming.
Sure.
Okay, so let's start, unfortunately, with the bad news. So in all of the kind of trends and stats that I saw, I mean, it's actually not all bad news. So it should be well understood, and obviously you can give some more insight into this, that the 2010s were just incredibly good for gaming. And really through COVID, that same thing occurred. Through the 2010s, growth was 150% of what it was for the past 20 years in games. And it outstripped global GDP and everything else the whole time. So overall, what we're seeing now could be essentially just part of some kind of pendulum swing back to a more normal growth curve with some of the other factors that we've seen. Anyway, but here's some of the bad news. Game spending overall and the industry itself has shrunk since 2021. And games are an outlier because books, music, and in particular digital video have all grown since 2021. Many studios have closed, shrunk, or frozen. Some of this is potentially due to over-hiring as part of COVID or whatever it might be, and then there have been massive failures for things like basically any major studio has had issues. And then overall funding has dried up both from publishers and from VCs. So there's lots of different factors for this. But overall, pretty much since 2021, we're down about 10%. And a lot of this is actually due to lower engagement players have basically stopped playing games. And so kind of like the Facebook gamers and some of the people that you can see that would pick up a game here and there, they've essentially, at least statistically, it looks like it's possible that they have jumped to things like TikTok or watching video on their phone through YouTube or something like that. So that's all the bad news. So then if we think about the good news, is that this is all happening in an environment where like the games are actually better than ever. We have just some really, really great games out there. The technology is very good. There's also way more ways to play it. And there are more players overall and also more types of players who are playing. The other trend that you see through all of these things is essentially coming up on just competition with inside games is incredibly steep. And then competition to other activities for your leisure time is also very steep. And so there is a discoverability issue, and there are all these other things that are contributing to these factors. So that led me to looking at, through a lot of these reports, essentially where the future is. So we can walk our way through some of these. The last one I have is a grab bag, which is why it's just a question mark. We'll see if we have time to get there. But the big trends that I see are what they call black hole games, which is where we can start. Then extended reality, artificial intelligence, mobile gaming, handhelds and consoles, and then eSports. There are some other trends out there that hopefully we'll touch on as we kind of move through all of this. But where I wanted to start is actually with the idea of black hole games and where I wanted to bring you in. Because we started college in 2002. In 2004, we both joined the beta for World of Warcraft. And then that kind of became a bit of a black hole game for us. So by black hole games, these are games that gamers will take on as like their main game And they may stray off into other games and play them for a bit or something, but they end up returning to that game. And the reason why they're called black hole games, at least in these analysts' view, is that they continue to suck you in and that you have so much of an investment in terms of your network, digital currencies, your time investment, that it's very, very difficult to get gamers to move away from it. And I see this starting now. I have kids that are 10 and 8. Roblox, Minecraft, and Fortnite are all up here. Those are the main games they play, and there's lots of reasons for that, including things like Fortnite is free and it's on every single device you could possibly play on. Minecraft is relatively cheap. It's also on every device you could play on. Roblox is just so vast that even though it's mostly PC-ish only, there's some places you can play it, it just becomes this kind of ecosystem for these games. So, I mean, let's start there. Like, what do you think about the trend of black hole games and its impact on the industry as a whole? Because this seems to be relatively emergent behavior from the 2010s.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is, I think, I've spent most of my career trying to make these kinds of games.
Yeah.
You know, and most recently working on World of Warcraft, which is very much one of these, right? Like I can't remember the exact stat, but I think it was like the median World of Warcraft player plays something like 26 hours a week, which is just crazy, right? Like it's just like.
Which includes our parents, clearly, who are in their 70s and play basically every day.
Yeah. And so there's the thing with these games that I think is really interesting is like, well, this is a lot of what we see here. The behavior we see here is exactly what spurred all the VC investment starting in like 2019, was the idea that you could make these service games. They would mimic a software as a service model, which is what a lot of VC was built off of, this sort of enterprise SaaS businesses that would be very sustainable from a business model perspective because they effectively can just, they're very predictable. Like the challenge with traditional gaming, premium gaming, is it's sort of seen as like an entertainment product in the same way that a film is, where you make 50%, 60% of your revenue in the first 6 weeks. And it's not super predictable. It's very lumpy, rather than something like Fortnite or Roblox or any of the ones up here, which are monetizing like regular engagement. And a lot of mobile games, which we don't have up here, which very much are these same things.
Right, we'll talk about
If you
those.
took any of the mobile games, like a lot of mobile games are built.
Well,
Even
yeah,
more
Call of
so,
Duty Mobile
right?
is the one I have up there, but yeah.
And so I think the major trend here, like the thesis behind a lot of the original VC investment in games was all of the consumer investors that were investing in 2000 through 2008 in social media companies,
Web 2.0.
thinking that like the new social media is going to be this. And it is.
Yes.
Like, these are the third
Yeah.
places, this is where people are going.
Yeah.
But it turns out there's only, just like there's only one Facebook, like there's significant network effect impact. And so now it's basically impossible to launch one of these. It's very, very
Well,
difficult.
and the highest, the kind of the biggest name failures have been ones like Concord and Avenger, other kind of games as a service, Skull and Bones or whatever the pirate
The
one
thing
was
is
that
that-
Ubisoft launched, that have just, they never took off because they were trying to go, they were targeting a lot of these gamers are over-indexed, like they're over-targeted. And then what that leads to is that like trying to get them to unstick is just very, very difficult.
Yeah, but the reality is like, if you can make one of these, the profitability of these businesses is insane.
Well, the one I have up there is Grand Theft Auto 6, which is like, I think the two stories that are going to be of interest for this kind of topic for the rest of the year is essentially the Switch 2's launch, because it'll cover things like all the uncertainty of tariffs and potentially increase in game prices and stuff that they've talked about over the past week and a half, and then the launch of Grand Theft Auto 6, because like that's really going to kind of show essentially like any kind of hypothesis you can have on black hole games is going to show as part of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, so this is where we start to get into some of the interesting anchoring around this, because these games are obviously built to be just like constantly updated, to constantly have you being there, really targeted at you and your friends. Like I remember seeing the stat when we were working closely with the Epic team, that it was something like if you played in like, it was 4 or 5 pre-made groups in a given month, you were like 3 times as likely to play in the next month before that. So a lot of it was focused on just like, how do we get you to play with friends? Which goes all the way back to my time with Facebook games, where at Zynga, we had this idea of an active social network, which was like how many people are you receiving a gift from or whatever every single day. And if it was over 3, you were way more likely to stay than not. And so the trend with all of these is mainly, these are social networks. Like these are now, this is like where we're seeing the trend moving away from kind of like, you know, this is the third space. And then there's like a meta one over all of this, which is Discord. Right. Which is or Xbox Live or whatever it would be, like your platform of choice, where you get home and you log in to hang out with your friends and you go do whatever. And so the interesting thing about the 2 areas you just mentioned, which is like the Switch launching, which I guess we're going to get into handhelds so we can talk about it, but I didn't see one on here with Grand Theft Auto. I mean, I think these are somewhat interrelated, but to say like, the interesting thing about the Switch more than anything is like, it's just an iteration on the Switch 1. Right. So there isn't a ton new there from a hardware perspective. The biggest thing that's interesting is the cost of the games. Yeah. Going for a much higher anchoring, there's kind of, you know, I think the understanding now is that almost certainly GTA 6 is going to be $100, maybe even more. And they can probably demand that. And now the risk of that is you have this extreme barbelling, which has been happening in the industry for the last 10 years, where there's like the sort of death of like the single A, double A game. You basically have games that are under $20, under $10, under $5 in some cases, right? When you look at like the Balatros of the world, the Vampire Survivors, some of these like kind of one-person indie games, or even Schedule 1, which has made several $1 million, and I think it's still $20. Like, and then you're going to have this other extreme of $80, $90, $100 games, and the challenge is going to be there's no middle. So you're either in this pool with everyone trying to compete for this really small amount, or because competing, one of the issues with Skull and Bones is it came out at a premium price point. Yeah. And so you need to be a GTA 6 or a Call of Duty or a Zelda or a Mario to demand an $80, $90, $100 price point. So if you're shipping a new title at 60, you're in the no man's land. Yeah. And so I think that's going to have a tremendous impact of what is really going to drive some of the price problem. And I think the biggest concern that I have, like I think it's great that Nintendo is anchoring for a higher price point. Games for a long time have stayed at the same price, where if you do the math back to what it would have been.
Yeah, yeah. Other media, books, tickets for movies, all that stuff has gone up at a higher rate than games have. Games have kind of been stuck essentially at like AAA at 60 to 70-ish, even with inflation and everything else.
But I think the challenge is like what that will mean is the difference between what you're talking about with like movies and books is you don't have free versions of that.
Right.
You don't have Fortnite.
Right.
Roblox is free.
Yeah.
And so I think you have that's where it starts to get like League is free.
Right.
And so you end up with this very. I was talking with a friend 3 or 4 weeks ago where he was like, "Hey, if we're heading into a recession, isn't that great for games? Like, will we see more investment into game companies?" It was like games are traditionally seen as recession-proof, but I think that's like games as a whole, not like new investment into games, because I actually think it's just going to flow into like these existing games. Like if people can't go on vacation, like games are traditionally seen as incredibly high value in entertainment hours per dollar because it's much cheaper to go buy a game and you get 100 hours out of it than like take a family of 4 to the movies. But it becomes a big concern that I would have of like, does this just, what we saw, the numbers we saw at least like going through COVID is all of the existing live games, they spiked massively. We saw like huge amounts of people return to World of Warcraft, huge amounts of people go into Fortnite, huge amounts of people go into Spellbreak we were working on, like just because they were the existing games out at the time. And so I worry that it's just going to get harder and harder for anyone to compete with a new IP. Like breaking in, we've already seen like the only games that I think could be considered black hole games that have shipped in the last couple of years is like probably PUBG, Apex Legends, Valorant, and Marvel Rivals are like the only ones in the last 5 years.
Rivals, yeah.
Right? And the only why is Marvel Rivals able to do it? Because it's the biggest IP in the world, right? And so you need an existing. It's really hard to break in with a new IP. And so there are very few of those games. Now, how many games have come out that have tried to do that? Countless, right? Dozens a year. Because like I said, if you can do it, these are massive businesses, right? Like these are IP-able businesses on their own, typically with a single franchise.
Yeah. Yeah, so we can continue on, but I should also say that like we did want to have this be a bit of a conversation, so if anybody has something to contribute, feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat, we'll keep an eye on that. So let's start extended reality, because that's where I've been living recently. And pretty much the market analysts in general have essentially missed on games as a whole since about 2022. They've been missing on XR, VR and AR as a whole since about 2017 to 2018. They expected it to be a lot higher adoption. Adoption's been fine, but overall, really the market is still too small to support a lot of games. And part of this, I think, is an issue with targeting, because there have been some AAA titles, like there was a Batman release last year, but I had on here as a black hole game previously, which is Gorilla Tag. And Gorilla Tag is a fascinating game because one, it's free on the Meta store, which again helps adoption of that as a game. But also, it's played, at least when I listened to a talk by one of the guys last summer, and he said that it's played mostly by gamers that are 11 to 17. So they're kind of outside of what used to be considered the absolute core demographic, which is 18 to 24. But now, like, games have fractured in such a way that, our age, when we were 18 to 24, we were the core game, because it was like the original Xbox and stuff like that. But now, it's almost like older gamers are willing to pay more, but then they're also buying more games for their kids and whatever else. And so, like, there's just, it seems like the industry as a whole has not done well in terms of like targeting for these certain constituencies, because like it would be completely non-obvious to make a Gorilla Tag game on VR for 11 to 17-year-olds and have it be just like they get millions of players. And I don't know how to remedy that, because I don't know if there was data to be able to try and back it up. But the other thing I wanted to kind of touch on is it seems to be now that there's continuing to be a race for augmented reality. Apple's talked about it, Meta has their Ray-Ban glasses, and besides Pokemon Go, which was a massive hit, and Niantic just sold that kind of portion of the business off recently, I'm not convinced that AR is a good platform for games. And so I wanted to see like your thoughts on, because like augmented reality, they've had demos for years of like, aliens or bugs pouring out holes in the wall to play games and shoot and all that stuff. And obviously Pokemon Go was a big success, but they tried it they had like a Minecraft one and they had a Harry Potter one, and they both failed.
The NBA one, they've done 5
Right,
or 6 games.
so
the only one that's come close to being sustainable as a monster.
So if extended reality continues to have a small, relatively flattish, dedicated group of gamers buying VR headsets, but then augmented reality becomes much more mainstream online with like phones in our pockets, what does that mean for games using AR?
Yeah, I mean, so the VR thing is interesting just because I think the most surprising thing is I think most of VR, I've never worked on VR. We talked about doing a lot of Proletariat, and I'm an advisor for a studio that does VR games. And the interesting thing with VR is, for the longest time, because of the price point for the Meta Quest and things like that being $500, $600, $800, there was just an assumption it would be 18 to 35-year-old gamers. And then, and that's why the price point stayed really high. Like these very limited experiences in VR, like 8-10 hour experiences, were selling for $40, $50, which was just like, they couldn't hold that price on Steam. It just wouldn't be competitive with like the types of experiences that you would see on Steam, but they were able to sustain that really high price point. And if you look at the Meta store now, it's like completely broken, because now that game has come out, there's like 50 orangutan, whatever, that are all free.
They came out with a second game that has tag in the title, and now there's like 100 games with tag.
Everyone's trying to SEO. It's like the same cesspool that is mobile, right? And so there's now a race to the bottom because you have a free game that's in there. And I think the really surprising thing is that like the audience that was actually going to adopt the VR side was not 18 to 35. It's basically like
it's 11 to
Roblox-y
17.
target.
It's like it's 10 and 11 year olds.
And I think that's and so that I think that's really interesting. How sustainable is that? It's still, you're still talking like low double-digit millions in total install base. So It's not a massive, you can't do the Fortnite 100 million monthly actives or Roblox in that area yet. But I mean, I do think, I guess, like, my feeling is I think AR glasses are inevitable, like it's going to happen. It's really just, to me, a question of, I think, when, if it's a good game platform or not, like, I think remains to be seen how well it will really work. I mean, certainly Pokemon Go is an extreme outlier. It's still a phenomenal business, like, but yeah, not repeatable, right? Even with some of the biggest IPs in the world, like seeing something like Harry Potter not work just shows that there was something else.
And they had a Minecraft one, and then also Minecraft had VR support, and they have like kind of stopped supporting it because like you would think something, a black hole game that big or like Roblox could come out on VR in such a way. I think,
So it's slightly biased, but I have a brother-in-law that met his wife on Ingress.
Okay.
Was it
Which is the first
sustainable?
Niantic game for
Yeah,
everyone who knows.
enough, or was Ingress sustainable and did it have a viable ecosystem?
So it was, from my understanding, is that it was profitable for what it was, but it was relatively small. And then what happened was they did Pokemon Go, which is essentially just like a rebranded version of Ingress, with like some slightly different features. And that blew up in such a way that was so massive that then trying to kind of capture that lightning in the jar again, they just haven't been able to do it. Niantic has since, like, one of the reasons why I think they're selling off some of that stuff is they pivoted more towards kind of like data collection tech around like Gaussian splats, like being splats.
They made it AR 3D, like they wanted. And in a lot of ways it makes a lot of sense because Niantic, at least, I don't know a ton of people there or anything, but in conversations and stuff that I had, they see themselves as like a tech company, not really necessarily like.
They spun out of Google, right? Like Ingress was built.
Yeah.
So Ingress was really built, my understanding is to like be a location-based game,
Yeah.
not an AR game.
Yeah.
The tech wasn't there yet to do like what Pokemon Go does. But it was really like, there was an era
It was like capture the flag for people who don't know.
it was sort of a geocaching, it was like a digital geocaching game. So it involved like location-based, like you had to actually be in a location, there were two different factions, and I think like the core, they spun it out of Google and then started working on Pokemon Go, and like the big difference was they had the AR ability of like, now that you're here, you can like have this compelling actually like toss a Pokeball, and I see that actually happen, which just wasn't a thing in Ingress originally. But I think it's their focus for a while has been on trying to establish this like location-based AR type platform that could then lots of games be built on, but they haven't proven it's repeatable at all. And so as far as this goes, like the form factor, it needs to actually be glasses.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to be cheap enough and ubiquitous enough. And then like, of course there will be games on it. Like every platform.
I have no
every
doubt about
platform
that.
has
I'm just wondering
Um,
about the kind of, and some of this could go back to just like the early history of mobile games, where like also mobile games were kind of rough for a while too, which we'll talk about mobile in general.
certainly pre-iPhone era, right? The Jammed Out era.
Yeah.
So.
Nokia Engage.
Talking.
Yeah, so that's extended reality. So let's now move on. Let's talk a little bit about AI. So if you look at a lot of the data that's out there, a lot of devs currently don't really see an advantage. Some are using Copilot stuff to try and code. Some are using, some early generations, image generation stuff to help with brainstorming and things of that nature. But for the most part, like it doesn't seem like it's quite good enough yet to really help with what they're doing. At least that's what people are signifying in surveys. However, it can help with some specific design problems. And if you look at the trends, like one of the reasons why the software as a service stuff or the live service games or whatever else and the big AAA titles have had a lot of issues is that the cost to make games has gone up so significantly, especially for those big games, that if artificial intelligence could help just with the scope of those, then like that could, help make them more viable and have more either external money or publishers or whatever be interested in. The other thing that's been a trend for a little while now and ties both into extended reality as well as other trends is that game engines are now being used. At least 50% of game engine use is not for games. It's for other things. It's for enterprise simulation level stuff. It's for pre-production of movies, it's for all these other, full production of movies, whatever. So there's kind of like a retying together of these worlds that had been separated for the past like 15 years or so in terms of the technology kind of coming back. So, I mean, I think one of the things that this means is that there has to be a refocus on the ideas of games, because some of the barriers and costs to implementation and creation of games could be helped by some of these AI tools. In particular, also looking at certain things like helping with like bugs in QA, and also like certain types of customization for narrative and other things of that nature. So what are your thoughts on AI?
I think we'd spend the rest of the talk.
I know. We'll take about 10 minutes on it. But we can spend the entire time on any one of these.
Well, so I think the tide is rapidly turning on this, but I think what you're saying, like the core anchoring is cost, right?
Yes.
So like if you look at something like Spider-Man 2 from Insomniac, made $900 million. That's a ton of money, but it costs $350 million. That's not a great business.
Well, and one of the weird trends with even the Black Hole games and other huge franchises is that sequels, at least in the meantime, have had an increasing size of budget, where the second game is like 1.5 times the first game, or whatever it might be. It's more than the first one. And that doesn't make any sense, because if you think that anybody who played the first one, you're not going to have people skip the first one to play the second one. So your possible funnel of players is going to be only a slightly smaller amount than to play the first one, right? So it's your kind of like universe of game players is just not going to be that large, unless you are potentially like a Counter-Strike 2 or something, if people didn't play the first one. But for Spider-Man 2, the first one was probably going to be the peak in terms of the number of people playing it, unless you can bring them back in some way, which they're trying to do, but it doesn't justify the 1.5 times the cost.
Yeah, I mean, so all of this is being driven by cost. And I think like there is, just coming back from GDC only a few weeks ago, the Game Developers Conference, the biggest trend when I talk to people, all my friends that are running studios now, is North American game development is way too expensive. And so whether it's artificial intelligence that helps that, offshoring and outsourcing, which has been a major trend for years. I mean, back when we were working on Spellbreak, we had 95 or 100 full-time employees, but like 300 people in total working on the game, including like external contractors and everything else. And I think that's what we see today. I mean, now it's very common.
And the biggest areas of expansion in terms of the number of game developers are in Asia, right? China, all the Chinese, lots of Chinese developers are growing at substantial rates. Same thing with Japan, same thing with Korea. And one of the reasons why is that like their overall costs are just way lower than the US.
I mean, it's not just, Asia's certainly big, but like South America is really big, and Eastern Europe is really big. Yeah. Like they're, you can, at Proletariat, the like per person month cost was like $15,000 to $17,000 a month. For like high quality 3D artists in Argentina, it's like $2,800. So you're talking like an eighth the cost, a fifth the cost, and it's really hard to compete with that. And I think that's what's going to drive a lot of so like the two factors are going to be cost and time. Because the two things that have shifted from say like the PS2 era is you used to be able to make a AAA title in the PS2 era in 3 years. Now it takes 7. And that just means you can do, and now it takes 7, it takes 2,000 people, and it takes $300 million, where it used to take 80 people, 3 years, and $60 million. And so that's, I think, the shifts that we're going to see is, and every studio I talk to now, where maybe it was like more of a, hey, we don't really see the advantages, everyone now is like, we're focusing on this, we're making this a priority, and basically we're starting, for some of the studios that are a bit more on the extreme side, they are evaluating like every new hire and seeing, is this something we think we can automate? And that's everything from QA to, tech art, which like we use machine learning stuff doing tech art on World of Warcraft while I was working on it. Like there's a bunch of ways to improve the automation. And if you look, like there are some areas that are very close to being what I would call like solved for development. 2D generation is getting better and better and better, and that's both for like 2D assets for concept, as well as like UI art and anything else that would be 2D, actual 2D assets. 3D is not quite there yet, but it continues to improve. VFX is sort of like a question on whether or not it's getting there. There's some like volumetric like VFX tech that I've seen that's kind of getting there. Animation is actually very close, because animation, it's basically, they have these huge libraries of performance capture that they can just feed these models. And we've been doing procedural animation for a long time. I mean, the way footsteps
It's weird to
work-
call this artificial intelligence because like all this stuff has been going on for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly there are some like there are LLM factors of what that adds, but there are areas of this, like for more than a decade, when a character walks up the stairs, that's not hand animated. Like there's procedural animation to get the feet to land on the stairs.
Or like color swapping,
and
color
so
swapping palettes to get more content out of what you already have.
procedural content and things like that have been around for a long time. And so, but I think like there are certain areas, like those areas in art, mostly sound, like music, like voice over, like that's basically solved. Like if you wanted to just use AI voice, you totally could, and people probably wouldn't even know, most people. Now, would you want to do that for like, Troy Baker being Indiana Jones, like doing Harrison Ford? Like, no. You still want like a Troy Baker to give that level of performance, and that's one of the things that made that game a success. But for random NPC barks of like, want to buy something for my shop today? Like you probably, does that really help? But the goal for all of this is, does it reduce cost or does it reduce time? And I think the trend right now, the focus, like if I was going to start a studio today, as I think about it, is I think a game that used to cost $200 million, $250 million in 6 years of time is very soon going to be able to be built for 3 years of time and $50 million. And whether that's through outsourcing or artificial intelligence, like I think we are getting there, where you're not going to be able to, I don't think you're going to be able to make a $300 million game for $1 million, but I think you're very quickly going to get massive changes when you look at like the using agents to do QA testing. That's happening now, and it's super effective. Looking at all of these areas, if you just go line by line, the biggest areas that are not there yet are things like level design, system design. It's actually the design areas that I think have been the most challenging. Now you can procedurally generate a level and then have a level designer go in and like improve
like
it,
an edit.
but it's just not as close as some of the other pieces. And obviously we know code generation continues to improve, and like most engineers that I know in the industry are using Copilot or some form of like autocomplete. So I think what we're going to see is smaller teams trying to move faster.
Yeah.
Because in theory, like what it should be able to do, the two things I think are most interesting about some of the artificial intelligence side or even on the outsource side is basically, can you increase iteration time? So in a world where you do, hey, we do a build, but then we need to get everybody together, like a Proletariat, we were working on Spellbreak, we couldn't play test every single day just because we needed like 40 people to play test because of the Battle Royale game. And so, but if you have 40 agents that have been programmed like your player persona, where like some of them are going to play more aggressive, some of them are going to play more passive, some of them are going to play more socially, so you can get a wide spread of them, and then you can have them overnight or in the next hour play 10,000 matches of a Battle Royale, and then you can get the data back out. That becomes really useful to be like, hey, are we trending in the right direction? Is the balance right? Do we feel like we have, if we change jump height, does that all of a sudden make one class be more effective than another class? And that speed up of iteration time, I think, really helps. And then the other piece is the ability to parallelize production. So the most expensive part of any game's development is production, because that's when you actually move into true content production. The teams are the biggest, everything. And so if you can, instead of having 3 level design teams that each need to make 4 levels in series because you just can't hire up or staff up enough to do that, if instead you outsource and you do all 12 levels of your game at once. Now there's some risk to that. You really need to know the type of game you're making, for example. It becomes much harder. If you can do that, you cut your time in production down to a quarter of what it was. And so that's typically what takes the most time. Usually games take anywhere from 12 to 24 months to sort of figure out the prototype. And then from there, it's like, how much time does it take to actually make all the content? And I think those are the areas that are going to be the most accelerated.
Yeah, so I think all that. So the one other thing I wanted to touch on for this though is that there have been certain kinds of things that games have always tried to do, whether it's essentially like actually customized narrative or like actual impacts to a game's state, that there was just kind of no feasible way to do it because it starts to become a tree where the potential outcomes are so vast that you can't possibly do the production side of it, that there are actual potential ways of using these tools in AI to achieve those design goals, where you could have, you know, an NPC that doesn't just say the same thing over and over again. It does actually have more free-flowing conversation or something like that too. And I think at least for right now, there doesn't seem to be a lot of chatter about that, which I think means one of two things. One is that people don't think it'll actually work, or they do and they're just being really secret about it because they want to be the first to do it.
I think part of it is, there I think was a concern across the industry on AI just being way overhyped. Because 2 years before AI was super overhyped, like, you know, in 2022, everyone was hyping AI. Oh my God, it's going to change everything. You can make any NPC do whatever you want. And, you know, you can walk up to a random farmer in World of Warcraft, and you can go on a procedural quest with them for 100 hours. And I can tell you, because I was working on World of Warcraft at the time, like, we just didn't think that was going to be good or fun. But I think before that, we had basically everyone hyping up like Web3, and we were like, okay, that's
yeah. So I left
area.
crypto and Web3 off of this entire talk because from what I saw at GDC is that it's effectively dead.
I mean, there's still
just
small
not a lot to
pockets
it.
trying to do something with it, but it's like, it's certainly not what it was in 2020.
Yeah.
But in 2022, when everyone was hyping up AI, I think there was just a concern on like, do gamers even want this? And then there was a real sticker shock of like, wait, it costs how much to do, you know, if I want my NPC to say something randomly and it's using, you know, X number of tokens from OpenAI every time, that's like, do we think people are going to start to, like, there were insane ideas of like, oh yeah, people will start to pay like, you know, cents every single time they walk up to, which is just like a ridiculous thing. And so, but I do think the World of Warcraft is a good example for this, because one of the things where I think AI personalization would actually be really cool is every piece of voiceover, because we don't know the player's name, it's like, hail champion,
Right.
or hello hero,
Yeah.
because we don't know your name. And we're not going to have the voice, you know, the voice actor go in and record whatever, 5 million names, right?
Yeah.
And so, but you could very easily like figure out, you know, go through a couple of iterations of just, you decide and tweak to make sure your name's getting pronounced the way you want it.
Do the character creator, just
And
have
then,
like
and then
the spelling of the name when you pick the name.
yeah, and then you could have Jaina Proudmoore say like, you know, hail champion, or whatever the character's name is, and that would like be real cool, and that would be totally possible. And you can do that level of personalization. I think that I'm sort of torn, because on some level I feel like there's been a lot of pontification that personalization is going to be like, when I sit down to watch The White Lotus, you know, on streaming, and you sit down to watch The White Lotus, you can make different choices and you get a personal, and like, I don't know if people want that for just themselves, but maybe if it was like your small group of
Director's
friends,
cut, your director's cut.
like some small group of friends, you're still, because a lot of this is still a communal experience.
Yeah.
There's like, hey, did you see what happened on White Lotus last night? If that goes away, is there that much of a drive to go do it? Where there's always been some aspect of this in games, where even now, like a lot of the discourse around a game like Blueprints, for example, which is like a run-based game, some people are finishing it really quickly, other people are taking much longer. There's totally different experiences. Did you go to this boss first? Did you go to that boss first? That's always been a factor in games, but I can still talk about it. A lot of people want to play a game when everyone else is playing it and talking about it. Like every time there's a new Souls-like type game, especially one that comes from FromSoft, where like they don't share anything, there's this like, we're all trying to figure it out ourselves, and like, look, I discovered this thing, I discovered that thing. It's like a world first in World of Warcraft or in Destiny 2 or in any of these games that are run-based like that, where people want to be part of that community. So personalizing to that, I think, is actually counter to what people want out of that experience. And so I do think there are ways to personalize it. And I think actually some of the more interesting stuff in my mind is more attempt to do more personalization around things like tuning. I mean, this is all stuff that like Left 4 Dead has done for years. But making it so that you are keeping players in a flow state, or doing things that are really, you know, horror games that can do this effectively sound like they would be terrifying if they can like really know whenever you try to get calm and like, you know, put you over the top. So I do think there's some amount of personalization with that, but like wholesale, you're going to get your own personal version of, you know, Spider-Man 2's story that is totally different from my story. I don't think you want that. Is my guess. Maybe there's some subset of players that do, and like that's one of the interesting factors where, for me, I maybe have like an extreme viewpoint on where I think this is going to go, because I do think the cost of content is basically going to go to zero. All the content that's going to be created is going to be high quality. So you no longer, two areas you used to be able to compete on in games is the amount of content you could make and the quality of it. And those are just gone. Like that is just a level playing field now. So what do you actually compete on? You basically compete on like totally new ideas, which are very hard, or you compete on IP. And so I think that's where like IP ends up being extremely, like I think we are at a point now where creating a new IP is going to be tremendously difficult, because the way new IPs used to get established is they would target a niche audience with a new IP and then grow it. There's going to be no more niche audiences, because if the cost of content's nothing, you can make content for that audience with whatever would be targeted there, and it'll be viable. And so you could say like, hey, you know, there's 10,000 people out there that want a Boston Red Sox anime. It doesn't make sense to make an anime today for that because it would cost too much money. But if it costs, say, $10,000 to make that, it probably makes sense to go make that anime. And now you're in this really weird world where there's no more niches. And this is kind of the approach that Netflix has been taking with their content for a while, where they're actually targeting these really small niches with really low budget products, but it works to then get and broaden the base so that everyone feels like they have something specifically targeted for them. And that you're going to see that across like every form of media.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that I underlined after kind of going through all this stuff was a focus on the ideas themselves. Because, yeah, I think you're right on the IP side, and then the only other corollary to that would be that if you are like a FromSoft or Naughty Dog or whatever, that people are coming not necessarily to the franchise, but to you as a franchise, to like your particular, just like your developer, like your company. Okay, so this one's probably going to be slightly faster, but we'll just talk a little bit about mobile gaming. So in mobile gaming, I do actually mean phones. I don't include the Switch or like the Steam Deck and stuff. We'll talk about that next because I have consoles and stuff on the next slide. But mobile gaming has seen a really interesting trend where it's one of the areas of games where it has continued to grow, where some of the other ones have shrunk. And the main reason why is that over the past 10 years, lots and lots of more people have gotten iPhones, basically, and like phones in general. So just the sheer number of human beings that now have access to this platform has just gone up super duper high. And over 50% of the current market is global, outside of the US, basically. But another interesting thing that I found was that the number of iOS games is actually down 66% since its peak in 2016. And then the other thing about mobile is that video, in particular, TikTok and YouTube, are eating up leisure time on the platform. And that goes back to some of my very first slides about the bad news, where essentially what seems to be happening with some of these trends is that some of your like low salience gamers who like play a random Facebook game or whatever, or could be brought in via network effects to play more games, have essentially just dropped off. And instead of having network effects in games, they now like share YouTube meme and TikTok videos amongst their friends as a network effect for that platform instead. So they're kind of getting more sticky to like those uses of their leisure time versus playing games. The other trend that I think I didn't put on the slide, but I think is really interesting is, and this will probably make us sound old, but the amount of people who are playing 3D games on mobile is massive. And like, to me, the idea of playing basically any 3D game on my phone sounds silly, but the number of people who are playing those black hole games, Call of Duty, mobile, Fortnite is also absolutely massive, PUBG on phone is also massive. They're just enormous. And so what used to be thought of as like, why would you ever do this from like a usability standpoint and whatever else, it turns out that there's tons of players who are more than happy to do it.
Yeah, especially international. I mean, like Free Fire is like kind of the PUBG equivalent.
Right, I'm talking, those games I mentioned, but like, I do have some notes on, I just don't think people would know what they are, but there are massive games in a lot of these other places, in particular China and Brazil, that have essentially their own ecosystems for these mobile games that are almost always 3D games. that are eating up a ton of the actual time the players are playing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge with mobile games is for a long time, there was just huge growth. And I think you're seeing this just in the mobile industry at large.
The
right?
sheer number of phones, right?
Also just the number of new apps that a person adds now compared to what they added in 2013 is just like significantly different. And I think one of the reasons, so the reality is like the mobile gaming business is very, very hard. You cannot, like the top charts are very calcified. It's very hard to break in.
Well, and the big winner is Apple, right? Because you're giving up so much money to be on the App Store that like, yeah, even for something like Call of Duty Mobile, their acquisition costs, like what it costs to actually get customers, was so high that like they did fine, but like they're Call of Duty.
So this is the problem, right? The problem with these businesses is if you're prior to the changes with IDFA and the ability to target.
For those unfamiliar, IDFA, that was what Apple implemented that made it more difficult to target ads to people using an iPhone. So it meant that ad revenues in general just basically plummeted in a way that made it very difficult to make money in other ways besides just selling stuff in the Apple Store.
You used to have this incredible ability through social networks, specifically things like Facebook, to target very specific users with ads. And Apple made changes to the privacy of what can be tracked and had a lot of them be off by default that you now have to like confirm a very scary pop-up to track that just completely took the legs out of the mobile industry pretty significantly, which was already a pretty difficult business. And the challenge is when you look at like a Call of Duty Mobile or a Monopoly Go, for example, any of these games that are at massive scale, they're operating at like an insane margin. They're putting 90% of their revenue back into marketing, but because they're at 200 million players, that's still a huge amount of like cash on cash dollars. And so you just get out competed because there's only so much ad space and there's only so much ability to do that. And for any of the existing players prior to the IDFA change, they had all of these like known payers and known profiles where they can target those much more effectively. And so it has just entrenched these companies and these games in a way that I think it's very, very hard to pull people out of them. And so the business itself is like very, very hard because it's so driven on user acquisition, and user acquisition is tremendously costly. So like the winners are basically like
it's also seemingly very market specific. Where like user acquisition for a set of consoles, which we'll talk about next, is a little bit more broad. But like if you're trying to do customer acquisition in China or in Brazil or in the US even, like the strategies and everything else are just like vastly different.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to basically mobile games specifically in the way they operate because they're almost exclusively free to play. Right, there are some premium titles, but those are usually basically ports of existing games, and they don't do
the numbers.
Yeah, but certainly not to the scale of like a Monopoly Go, like $1 billion business. But the way they operate is effectively like you put money into the money making machine. So you pay $100 into the money making machine.
It gives you
and 6 weeks later, it gives you it gives you $1.08.
Yeah,
and you take that 8 cents and you say, great, now we need to do that again every 6 weeks. And because they're on these 6-week lifetime value curves and that's how they were able to super target, you might as well spend as much money as you possibly can up to the point where you are comfortable to then get that tiny, tiny margin and then just crank that machine. And it's just super hyper optimized. And the only ways that people have found to reduce that cost of acquisition is IP. So now you have so many cooks in the kitchen, right? If you look at something like Marvel Snap, for example, Marvel Snap, from all we've seen, like basically like critically successful hit, is a pretty big business. But the actual money going to like the development studio at Second Dinner is very small. When you think about Apple takes a chunk. Then they had a publisher, which was driving a lot of the marketing, which was previously ByteDance, and now they're.
And then you have the Marvel IP.
Then you have the Marvel IP chunk. Then you have what the developer actually gets. Now, in theory, the Marvel IP chunk should be basically discounted on what the marketing cost would have been, and that's the only reason to do it. But still, like you would still spend as much marketing as you possibly could to get that 8 cents. You're just extending it further. So, I mean, that's the challenge with mobile.
The kind of one of the most interesting thing I think about mobile right now is just the possibility where if there is over the next 5 to 10 years, massive adoption of AR glasses, like if the technology does get there, it will essentially shake up this entire platform, probably in a way that we haven't seen in a while in terms of just like shakeups. So that's just something that I kind of keep in the back of my mind a little bit, that like that would be something that would just completely kind of fracture and break the current mobile, is if we just had mass adoption of, you know, people shifting to having a phone and glasses or whatever it is.
But here's the thing, when you look at like what we've kind of talked about so far today, there's actually like several different, we talk about games holistically as like as if it's one thing.
Yeah.
Like mobile games are almost exclusively played single player.
Yeah.
Like it's very rare. Like sometimes you have friends that like, but the idea of playing together is not that common. Now there are some games like, you know, like the Free Fires, the Call of Duty mobiles, like some of that is true, but their percentage of people playing together is nowhere near the same percentage as it is on PC console. And that's even true for Honor of Kings, and like maybe a little bit different in China for that just because it's a primary platform. But overall, it's much more like a single player type experience. And then on the opposite spectrum, you have the single player type experience of like the prestige games that Sony does, which is just a completely different type of business. And then you have the black hole games we talked about, which those are third place hangouts. So these are just like, they're all considered games, but they shouldn't be in the same category because they're not the same.
Right.
They're not the same target, they're not the same business, they're not the same any of it. So we holistically say, what's the state of the game business? It's like, well, which one?
Yeah, well, that's why I've tried to break it up like this. So yeah, so I mean, we can talk a little bit now about handhelds and consoles. So console sales are flat across the US and Europe over the past couple of years. But that is like, definitely need to take it with a bit of a grain of salt, because if you included handheld platforms like the Steam Deck, the Legion Go, all of the kind of like PC handhelds, if you called them consoles, because in terms of price and capabilities and everything else, they're kind of closer to consoles than they are to actual like desktop computers or even gaming laptops, you would see pretty significant growth. The other thing is just the sheer dominance of the Switch. Like the Switch was just an absolute massive hit in a way that both PlayStation and Xbox, you know, Xbox has always kind of been a very America-centric brand. It never really took off. The Xbox 360 did pretty well other places, but it's pretty much just here in the US. And PlayStation is much more global in terms of where it can go with it. But one of the things that we see is that a lot of the console games, it used to be that you have your console and your hardware itself matters, and then you have your first-party games that are actually released by you and are exclusive to your console. And we've definitely seen essentially a breaking of that, where for a while now, Xbox games are also on PC, but now lots of PlayStation games, even with the delay, are coming to PC. And then now also Xbox games are showing up on PlayStation, with like Indiana Jones being one of the biggest ones that we've seen so far. And so just like you said, with like, you know, games are a whole bunch of different things. It seems like actually all the consoles and everything are a bunch of different things, because the Switch 2 is definitely going to be in its own category, which is why I think it's one of the biggest trends to watch over the coming year. But like because it's essentially insulated from all of this other stuff. Like people will get to play their black hole games or to do their major gaming. Most people will have something else and a Switch. But now you're starting to see a group of people that are having something else and a Steam Deck. And sometimes you're also starting to see people have something else and a Quest headset. So there is still kind of this split that exists with gamers. And I don't quite know how to parse it, because it seems like there's too many confounding variables with like COVID, and nowadays with like tariffs and everything else and all the uncertainty. It's a harder thing to take a look at. But like, what do you think about handhelds and consoles?
So I think you're right in the way you have to look at the Switch as something totally different. I mean, the reality is like the Switch is a device for Nintendo IPs. Like the Switch 1 is a Mario Kart device. Like the attach rate for Mario Kart's like 72% on the Switch or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the cost of it going up to $80, I think, is, people are making it out to a big deal, but like
it's a Mario Kart machine.
Like people are gonna pay it.
And the crazy thing about it is like the you know, like I think Mario Kart 8 on the Switch has sold more than double Mario Odyssey or something like that,
Yeah.
which would be like the mainline Mario for that device. And so the reality is like third party on the Switch.
Well, I think
is
as
always
evidence
difficult.
that the pack-in for the Switch 1 was Mario Odyssey. It was like the game that you got with the console. The pack-in for the Switch 2 is going to be Mario Kart. Right. Like, so it's obvious that they kind of know
Because
where
that is the true hit.
their brand is
Like
going.
people don't, I think that there is a misconception, especially for more traditional gamers that want to get a Switch for Breath of the Wild, where Breath of the Wild was effectively a launch game. Like it came out very close to the launch of the Switch 1.
Right.
And,
Sure.
and it just is nowhere near the sales of Mario Kart 8,
Oh,
which
sure.
Mario Kart 8 was the Wii U Mario.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Right? Like it was
Not-
old
yeah.
when the Switch
Well,
1
that's
launched.
why it wasn't a pack-in,
Right.
Because it wasn't a release for the Switch.
Exactly. And so the Switch, like especially with the growth of Nintendo's IPs, when you have the Mario movie being like $1 billion movie, they're an IP business now, and the Switch is kind of exclusively for them. Like third-party games traditionally do not do well at all on the Switch. Now, I think there's probably a significant number, like it was still a major driver of like lots of people play Fortnite on the Switch, lots of
Yes.
people play Rocket League on the Switch.
Yes.
But for the most part, it's like premium games are all Nintendo first party IP, and then there's a small number of free games. But Nintendo just culturally does not love the idea of free games on there because they will never release a free game because they don't
They
believe in
barely
that.
do
They feel like
sales.
that. Well, they feel like that. But yeah, they almost never do. But they feel like that devalues the value of their content, and so that's why they're very restrictive. Like, there's no Roblox on the Switch, right?
Right.
Roblox will never come to the Switch.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a conscious decision because.
Well, I believe it's currently the most expensive version of Minecraft is for the Switch, and it comes with like Mario skins and whatever else to try and justify that. But I think it's like $30 versus like way
20
less
or whatever,
on
yeah.
PC.
It's possible.
Yeah.
But like, so the Switch I think is different than a handheld because there's actually a shocking number of people that never play the Switch in handheld. It's actually like, it's
Sure.
a home console.
Yeah,
price. Where I think the handhelds, the growth that we've seen there is, to me, I don't think we'll get that much like growth out of it in terms of, because it's all the same games. I was playing Assassin's Creed on my Steam Deck.
Right, but I also think people are shifting from, people just because of like their other habits or whatever. You don't really want to have a gaming laptop now. They're heavy. They're kind of annoying to work with. Like they're just like kind of cumbersome. Like I have a gaming laptop, at home because that's what I do my VR development on. And I brought this iPad here because it's like maybe 8 pounds less than the laptop itself. So I wonder if what we're actually seeing is a shift from people, instead of buying like, a gaming laptop or something like that, to a handheld. And so it's almost in like its own separate category. But the other question would be that for the gamers who do not view a Switch as purely a Nintendo device, that want to play Hades or want to play some of these other, even like Minecraft or those other things, does Nintendo actually get a bit of a heat for competition from something like the Steam Deck, or if Xbox releases one that comes out with Xbox branding or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the spirit of what we were talking about before, it's hard to like lump the consoles together because they're totally different strategies, right? Like on Sony's side, they're still focused on exclusives, like major prestige content that then can become transmedia as their target. The Switch is really, and Nintendo is really just focused on like their first party IP and giving you the best possible experience that will be. You're never going to be able to go play, Mario Odyssey on the PC. They're just not going to do that.
Yeah.
And then the Xbox, obviously they've had their own strategy of trying to get their games everywhere because the business of Game Pass has not, like, the math doesn't work if it's only on their platforms. And so,
Which is funny because the other consoles are trying various types of subscriptions as well, and they're all kind of not quite right. It's just like the PlayStation one doesn't really work.
I mean, Netflix was not profitable for a very long time.
Yeah.
You have to build such a content backlog, even the cost of that is so high. But like the interesting thing about the PC is, for the first time, I think in the last couple of years, last year, 2, 3, we've actually seen growth in the PC market. And I think we're actually going to see any like gaming PC gamers. And I think that's because of like your kids' generation they're growing up with watching streamers and content creators who all play on PC. And so instead of wanting the latest PlayStation, they want the gaming laptop.
Yeah,
And so I
the
think
number
that
of, like,
changes
the
it.
number of 10 to 12-year-olds I know that are probably more interested in getting a like desktop PC with a nice big screen versus a Switch 2 is actually higher than I would expect.
Oh, the number of my friends that are like, hey, my kid wants a gaming PC for Christmas.
Yeah.
Like, what should I get them? Because, I
Because they're
bought
playing one of the black hole games.
I bought them a
right?
Switch
They're playing
before, and
Minecraft
now they want a gaming PC. They don't want a console.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like a reversal of a trend. Like for years, it was like, I mean, for as long as I've been in the industry, which is a very long time at this point, like PC gaming was dying.
Right.
And now we see like very clearly it's actually growing. And I think it's actually driven off of that content creator side. And so you have these you have four very disparate strategies, right? Like and like we haven't talked about where Valve's going, but like the Steam Deck,
Yeah.
I think Valve is moving into a full on like, let's do more hardware. Like they've always wanted to do this. They wanted to do, the Steam machines. They are trending in that direction. And I think they are going to, it is terrifying to me. I saw like the exclusive, the sort of leaked images of a Xbox handheld that has a Steam button on it.
Yeah.
And that to me is just like the craziest idea ever. It's just letting the fox in the henhouse.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if you're Microsoft why you would ever do that, because you're not going to get your platform cut. So you're just ceding all of PC gaming to Valve at that point. So unless you go and scoop up Valve, which they could totally do, like it just seems insane to me that they would allow that, because it seems like getting, the goal would be, I think what Microsoft was hoping with Game Pass is that they would eventually, and they're still fighting for this right now, like they want Game Pass on the iPhone.
Yeah.
They want Game Pass on the Switch. They want Game Pass on the PlayStation. And I think if they get that,
It's on the Quest. It's on the VR headsets.
then Game Pass could actually be profitable because you would get the scale you actually need. If Game Pass is only on the PC and the Xbox, which there are way fewer Xboxes than they are in these other platforms, it's not enough people. You don't have enough audience. And so you can't get enough subscriptions to be Netflix. So I think that's a major
Yeah, the
challenge.
the other kind of part of this that I wanted to touch on is that the PC has also become very weird in terms of essentially pricing, because now it's like Twitch and Prime Gaming, Epic, Steam, Xbox Game Pass, they all offer various slates of games, new and old releases, as like free or as part of like their kind of, so they're fractured in such a way. But then if you look at the actual sales numbers, and some of the stuff that I found fascinating was just how one of the best ways to essentially crack, to make your game show up and be identifiable is to just have massive sales of it periodically on Steam. And then you can get huge amounts of players, and then like you can kind of roll with it. So like Power World was a game that did that, where like it was like free for a couple days, like $5 or something like that, and it came with like a second copy. So the other thing that's really interesting, in particular on the PC, where it's kind of much more the Wild West, is I think there's just a lot more innovation in like, hey, we're going to try these crazy things about, going on sale for 90% off or whatever it might be, and that just draws a lot more eyeballs to a game than you would normally get just on the Steam front. Because the other stat that I had was now the number of games released per month on Steam is equal to the number of games released in the year of 2016.
Well, so the interesting thing, the current, so this is counter to what you would expect. Digital distribution is completely flipped from what you would do in retail.
Sure.
Like in retail, you don't have these really long tails. Like you're not selling a 2-year-old game at retail, or you weren't. But retail doesn't really exist anymore in games, but like, in general, you just wouldn't do that. You wouldn't have the shelf space. That's not true. Like some of it, when you look at like Devolver, for example, so Devolver ships 10 to 14 games a year, independent, publisher. They're public, so you can see their numbers, and like 80-90% of their revenue is just backlog. And how does that work? Like the general best practice right now is like you launch with a sale, and then you go on sale every moment that Valve lets you, because going on sale pings everyone that's on the wish list. that the game's now on sale. And it's like one of the only ways to notify people about your game. And the interesting thing, like a stat that I thought was really interesting, is one of my friends who runs a game studio that has several games on Steam, is the higher the discount that someone buys the game at, the lower the likelihood they ever launch it.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of people that are buying it because, like, I don't know, man,
It's a good deal.
Civilization
It's a
5
good
is
deal.
$2.99. I guess I should buy it. And then, like, that's just, but I've never launched it.
Yeah.
And that's, like, there's some real concern. But Valve, Steam is constantly evolving. And so for a long time, it was like, get the right number of wish lists, then you hit the right algorithm to be able to be, like, sort of front page. There's constant shifts as to how that would actually work. And so now there's a big question on what's the right way to try to break in or break through on any of that. And for the most part, you do want sales trajectory and growth. You do want basically high review scores. So the higher, being above an 80 is actually tremendously important, or 85 or 90. But yeah, it's really challenging to navigate how you would do that. And the general best practice is you go on sale every single time you can. And there's just when you calculate the average sale price for games now, it used to be, you'd estimate like 75 to 80% of the true retail price. Now it's more like 60. And some of that is, a lot of that is the sale price, but also most of that is actually also localization of prices. Like games just cost less in different areas of the world. So.
Yeah, so the other thing, there's emerging data on this. So it's like, it wasn't something that I put on here, but it seems like the sales in particular for like kind of contained games, so experiences that are somewhere between like 10 to 20 hours, either single player or multiplayer, if they go on sale, that is one way to essentially unstick people from their black hole game to have them play your game. Because like what can happen a lot of times is if like, is either release day for something, say, like Elden Ring or Black Myth Wukong, where people are drawn away, they will consume that entire game, and then they will go back to their black hole game. It seems like the other way that this occurs is essentially a game goes on sale, and you're talking to your people that you usually play, your community, the black hole game with, and you're like, hey, what if we all got this and we played it? And then like you kind of detach from that, go play it because it was on sale and everybody can get it, and then you return back to your black hole game. And so it's like a really kind of interesting phenomenon that appears to be one of the best ways to essentially try and get people to diversify their actual kind of gaming diet.
Yeah, I mean, we saw this in our era of playing a lot of World of Warcraft. Sure. You would see when you were kind of in a lull of content.
Yeah.
Entire guilds would go like, let's go play WildStar.
Yeah.
But unless WildStar was,
but that was a service.
Incredible.
Yeah.
You wouldn't stick with it. Because the second there was a new expansion or a new piece of content. And so like that's what you're
Which is why I think it's important for like it to be a capsulized experience and not trying to be a game as a service.
Yeah, you have to get all the money up front, right? Because like
that's why it's like Space Marine 2.
Right.
Or actually that's probably the best example. Because Helldivers is more of a
but I mean, still $40 upfront price.
Yeah.
Like they were not built to make their money over a 9-month LTV, right? It's valuable that they did. They were priced in such a way that they wanted to make their money upfront. But yes, I mean, you want to it's pretty known when the major black hole games do their season updates. It's like every 10 to 18 weeks, and so you can try to shoot the curve and go go right in the middle. And try to be at a time where there is a lull, where there aren't other games coming out, to see if you can pry some of that audience out. And you don't want to launch on top of like the holiday update for Fortnite if you're targeting that audience, just because like they're going to be playing Fortnite. And this is one of the challenges of breaking in to any of these. While you will get maybe some people, like when I look at something like Concord, kind of was a failure to launch, it didn't really get there. But like let's look at X Defiant, which tried a little bit to be Call of Duty. They launched basically 6 months opposite of Call of Duty with the intent to try and be able to try and sustain an audience.
Yeah.
Because it's the furthest away that they could possibly be. Like 6 to 9 months post a Call of Duty launch, you're already at the tail end of the content for that. Call of Duty is the best chance you can get. But the challenge is like they needed an audience to stick with it when the next Call of Duty rolled around, and it just like it didn't work.
All right. And then so the last Are we just about there?
We can,
Questions?
yeah, maybe.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, the last one I had up there, which like, I don't even know if either of us have a lot to actually say about, was gonna be on esports. Because the one, trends in esports actually look pretty bad overall. There's lots of kind of issues with esports. But the one kind of thing I did want to bring up a little bit is that underlying a lot of this stuff is actually that a lot of the leisure time on phones and stuff that's not completely captured yet, because a lot is proprietary, is people doing gambling, like sports gambling and other gambling inside of esports. And like, it's pretty gross, not my favorite thing in the world to read about or hear about. But I think it's just like, it's one of the biggest ways that esports is growing is by getting sponsorships from gambling as well, which like also I don't love to hear about. But then on the flip side, I know that one of the biggest clubs here at Northeastern is our esports club. It has 300 members. So like there is like this inherent popularity, but it doesn't seem to be able to do anything.
Yeah, I mean, from a business standpoint, it's marketing. Like it's not a sustainable standalone business, or it hasn't proven to be yet. And
Except for like ones that are contained, like League of Legends, because they run
which is still not profitable for them though.
Right, but they do it
that
as a
is
loss
money
leader for the
losing
game
thing.
itself.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Now there are some of the teams that can make a little bit of money, but it's small. It's like not a lot. Like these are not huge businesses.
Yeah.
Seeing some of these like IPO or get SPAC'd at like $1 billion, like they're selling for pennies now because it just doesn't hold up. So no, I mean, I think the bigger, more interesting thing, which is a whole other topic of conversation, is more the esportification of sports. And what I mean by that is like the ability for me. Well, more it's like I want to watch, the Patriots play football, but I want to see my favorite streamer as the commentator, not NBC's commentator.
Right. Okay.
And I think that that's a trend where, like a lot of esports, if you look at like live streaming esports, you have all of these well-known creators co-streaming it and giving their own commentary.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see that more in traditional sports. And I think that's a direction. It's weird for us. It's not weird for like maybe a younger audience.
Well, I mean, Thursday Night Football was on Prime. Well, it was on Twitch as well. It was on Prime.
Co-streaming it with a bunch of people.
And there were a couple times where they did that. But there was also a certain feed that had like extra stats and stuff on it too.
I mean, I think with the Super Bowl, like, couldn't you watch it with like the Manning brothers as the commentary instead of the other? So if you look at that, I mean, even what they're trying to do with like, what was it, the SpongeBob game or whatever they did?
Oh yeah, it was like
Right. So all of this is trying to basically just like how can you target different niches with the same content? And so like if you already love you listen to the Manning Brothers podcast, like you could almost assuredly, if Travis Kelce retires, the Kelce brothers are going to commentate, and people are going to show up to go like listen to them instead of like Troy Aikman on NBC, right? And so like that whole different conversation there. But overall, esports has just continued to like not really make sense to business. It's decent for marketing, but that's about it.
That just makes me think about how hard it is to watch a full season of sports on
Super hard.
anyone, like because of cable not existing anymore. But like if you had streamers, like I could see myself joining somebody's stream of the game instead of like having to pay for the one subscription service to watch that one game.
Yeah.
Which they may make sense for them to do that if they want to try to like broaden their audience. Because sports in general, viewership of sports, football and the NBA are doing okay, but like obviously baseball continues to lose market share, and it's just in general like I think very concerning. Like how do they continue to grow? Like how do they make younger audiences, other audiences interested in sports? And so it might be a way for them to try and expand that.
All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So my dad works for Boeing, and he, since I have been a kid, most of what he's done has been using game engines to run like simulations for training and stuff at work, which I think they work with Unreal Engine now, and
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
it's weird for me because I'm not like into this rocket science world, so I'm like, I know what that is. I know you did that at work. Are there ways that you use game engines but not for?
Oh, I mean, me personally, I mean, well, so I've done some serious game stuff, which is like definitely kind of like on the edge of that kind of thing. But we've had like guest faculty like come and teach classes who worked and originally used either early versions of Unreal or Unity early on for various types of automation simulation where they kind of like build a factory in there. They look at like all these kind of viewpoints. CAD has gotten better for that particular use case, just like their software in general. But yeah, I mean, the capabilities and also the kind of ease of use of game engines has increased a lot. And I think will only continue to increase with the AI tools that are available, where it used to be a pretty heavy lift to get Unreal working on your computer. You had to like mess around with INI files and like do specific things. That's not the case anymore. And I also wonder, we talked about my kids several times, my kids are 8 and 10, and like there's a lot of, like Fortnite is trying in a lot of ways to bring kids into co-creation. And like Meta does this with their Horizon stuff on VR as well, where they're trying to bring them in to be like, hey, like, do you want to make your own kind of like Fortnite island, basically? And they're definitely using that as a bridge to get them to potentially use Unreal in the future if they need that as a tool. Because it's like, it's always been common where, you know, Adobe or whatever will give their software away to students because then students learn that software and then they go ahead and pay for it when they join the company. But it's definitely way different to have essentially looking at like, because it makes sense for them to do it because they have Unreal as well in Fortnite, but like have that be a method of co-creation where they're starting to learn some of the vocabulary of some of the spaghetti visual coding language and all that kind of stuff as part of that design. And so I wonder if my kids growing up will just have a better, with these AI tools and everything else, kind of like a better innate understanding of this stuff because they're kind of getting it. I mean, they may learn some of the stuff directly in school, but it's not the same way.
When I was at Imagineering, we use game engines to do pre-visualization for rides.
Yeah.
That's,
So
that makes sense.
So you build the whole ride in a game engine and you ride it. And a lot of that was for things like timing and sight lines, like less important for Disney World in Florida, but in Disneyland in Anaheim, it's like in a parking lot.
Yeah.
And so they don't want you to be able to see like power lines. And so there's actually a bunch of work that goes into construction and then timing. So one of the rides I worked on while I was there was Rainier Springs Racers, which was a Cars ride in Pixarland. And it's a dark ride, so there's a series of rooms you go in that kind of tells a story with the different characters, but it's really, really important to Disney that like you don't see, when you're on the ride, you can't like look through a door and see a character in 2 places. And so you do all this work to make sure the timing, the car size, the seats, every seat, what can they see, what's the timing, how much can they be spaced out, because all of that is important for throughput. How many people can you get through the ride in a given day? And so, yeah, game engines are like essential. Like a lot of pre-visualization is done in engines now, especially if you need to do things like light or anything else. Like when I started at Disney, I was doing graphics engineering. So a lot of my work was actually specifically on things like lighting for those pieces. And so that's a major area that's used.
I think the talk is wonderful, but I have a question. Piracy.
Yeah.
With the cost of AAA going so high, it feels like we should be pirating everything. But because the kids are only playing these live service games, it is impossible to pirate Minecraft and then play it with your friends. So where are we at with piracy? Is it...
Yeah, so there was some data I looked up on it, and where we're at is essentially that it's become very, very niche here, but it's pretty rampant in other parts of the world. Much like some of these other things, the other trends we've talked about, it's like, because phone security is a lot different in a lot of other places, internet security in general is a lot different than a lot of other places. But cheating / piracy is also something that AI can help solve because it can like be actively looking for solutions to these things. But it will be, someone will start a countdown timer when the Switch 2 launches to figure out how quick they can find an exploit to be able to get pirated games into that hardware. And so I actually think that going forward in the future, a lot of the piracy concerns are actually probably going to come from the hardware stuff itself than from the games. Because so many games now run inside of servers and stuff in a way that like they'll be able to kind of figure that stuff out. There's still going to be a lot of cheating issues because there are now. But in terms of just like what it used to be with piracy, that I don't think is as big a concern for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we've kind of gone over tipping point here where many single player only games still require a network connection. Like I believe it's Assassin's Creed I was playing.
You have to, like,
log in.
authenticate.
Yeah, you have to like log in to play it. So you still do see it. It's predominantly on the PC with games that don't have any form of like networked requirements. So that traditionally is more indie games. Most major publishers now basically like require you to log in order to play it because you're probably getting it digitally rather than on a disc. And even for disc-based games, like there's usually massive day one patches or day zero patches where you end up having to install all this stuff anyway. So it actually makes piracy like really difficult. That being said, like there are still pirated World of Warcraft servers that exist today that people play on. That Blizzard has not shut down. Like that's still a thing. But it's very much like I think much smaller than it was say 5 or 10 years ago when it just wasn't as common to see everything need a network connection. And if you remember the Xbox One era, there was this like outcry of, oh, do we need to be always online? Now it's just like expected. Like you can't, like no one expects, people tell you now, you're gonna buy a console for the kids for Christmas, like take it out, plug it in, download all the updates, because otherwise you'll spend all Christmas Day like updating your console, right? We're past the era where you can just like plug in the console, throw in a disc and play a game, like just like impossible to do. So that eliminates a lot of the piracy aspect. So
It's complicated.
for sure.
So I'm curious about what's your opinion on AI's role for like personalized narrative, because you mentioned about that briefly. So I think the idea you mentioned that like why not this become such a big success, because people can have common content they all watch to talk about. But I think another point is that even for games, like before AI becomes such a like big topic, there were already branch narrative. Like people were happy to talk about like games like Cyberpunk 2077, like they can get multiple endings. But the traditional approach for that is like you have to sort of create multiple endings that's which require a lot of resource, especially for artists, for developers. But like if we with AI, maybe is it possible to create something? I think creating some sort of a personalized ending without the traditional branch narrative approach. I think Netflix, they're kind of also trying testing this type of experience with their Black Mirror. Like I think the latest Black Mirror, they shipped 2 different versions, but that's kind of very subtle. So I'm thinking like, I think they're not interactive enough to be considered games, but would it be possible that there'd be a merge between more story-focused and more traditional games? So it's kind of like something in between. So people, maybe they're non-gamers, it would be interesting in this kind of product.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's totally possible and reasonable. I think, I've wondered if actually there's going to be, so Cyberpunk's a good example. So when you go to, because it's basically an open world game, when you go to like finish the story, it warns you. It's like, hey, no going back. Like if you enter this phase, you're going to go through this like story chunk, and the game, like the story is going to end. Then you can go back and play more afterwards. But like, it's like, hey, get everything else done. And like this is very common in games now when they're going to get to an ending. And I sort of wonder if there's an opportunity for that to be, do you decide, hey, I want one of the 4 endings that the developers put together, or like, no, like I want it to be more personalized based on my specific, because you made 100,000 choices during your playthrough of Cyberpunk, and now they only pick like 5 or 6 decision points. Like, did you decide to fall in love with this person? Did you kill that person? Like whatever. But if you look at something like Baldur's Gate 3, yeah, right. I don't know if you played much of that, but you can do like anything. And the combinatorial options that they put into that story is sort of insane. And it effectively feels like it's personalized. Now, there's a bunch of things that still seem to resonate with the community. It's like, hey, you can actually like fall in love with the bear, and all of those things. But like that to me, the potential endings there is so many that it ends up being more like, hey, what crazy thing did you experience? And I think but there's something, I don't know if it's interesting to players because they're like, oh my God, I can't believe the developers like put in the work to make this happen. And does it lose something if it doesn't feel that way? If it doesn't feel like it was hand authored? So.
Yeah, I mean, because we do have a model for customized narrative. It's just tabletop role-playing games, right? Like when you have a DM who's effectively like managing the narrative for you, then that does become a customized narrative depending on like whatever it is they're trying to play from, the plan that they may have had, what choices you make that impact what they're going on. So, you know, the race is on for someone to make a D&D dungeon master that will be able to be like run by AI. I definitely think it's certainly possible that it would be the case that like it loses some of the magic because it doesn't necessarily have that. I also think it's potentially a harder problem to solve than would be at first blush, because like one of the things that you see with AI in general is that it can definitely generate stuff, but the quality of that stuff is like varying. And so the amount of constraint you would have to put on it so that you're still within the band of the experience that you want to create may be so large that you're actually not creating something significantly different than what Baldur's Gate can achieve. Because you don't necessarily want these wild and crazy endings that like, you know, could lead you completely off to you know, completely break the game in some way or another. And so it's gonna take some time. It's gonna take some iteration. People are definitely gonna try it. So like, we're going to see this if there's not stuff out there already. But it's just a question of when will it start to be interesting enough to actually be good?
Well, so I think the interesting thing is like the tabletop role-playing example is a good one, but that's still a small group. You're all experiencing the same thing together.
Right.
And so, you know, but if you look at, I don't know if you saw some of this, but I saw some like video posts of the Minecraft movie and people like losing their minds in the theaters. And people like wanted that experience. Like they wanted like, oh my God, these people are like, there's one guy on another guy's shoulders doing the chicken riding.
Chicken jockey.
Yeah, and like, but they want to be part of that experience, right? It's the same thing in that like, there are big shared events where like everyone wants to watch the same Super Bowl. Does that mean that's the only, like, does that mean that they wouldn't want, you and your 4 friends would want your own customized version of Black Mirror that feels very much like it's yours in a way that tabletop role-playing feels super tailored to what you all want? Like, I think there's totally room for that experience. So I think it will mean that we won't have a shared Super Bowl or a shared Minecraft movie experience. Like, no, and maybe we'll actually see several different stages of this where like, hey, you and the people that are in, like, it's interesting, just to draw a line back to some of my experience working at Disney, a big push for a lot of the rides while I was there, a lot of the like new ride attractions was to make them feel repeatable. So that everyone
Like Star
wanted to do the
Tours,
same thing.
right? Star Tours is
So
like
Star Tours
10,000
moved into-
combinations.
It's 5 segments that can all be mixed and matched. So the ability for you to actually ride the same Star Tours ride every time, it feels like you'd never be able to do it. Because the combinatorial options there are so high. You may get some of the same segments again, but it was different enough that you and the other people in that ride would feel like you were feeling a unique experience that only like the 16 of you or however many fit in that box are able to do. And so I think there is a big space for personalized narrative. It's just a question of, I don't think every game is gonna have personalized narrative, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
I think we're on
All
time,
right.
but is there any other questions to close?
All right.
Okay,
Well, thanks everyone.
Those online.
yep.
No.
Yeah, we had some people online, but no
Oh,
questions.
yes, people have
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I mean, do you want to say anything about any of the stuff you're doing now or anything like that, or no? Okay, that's fine. I mean, that's why I didn't previously. Yeah. If you have other questions or other follow-up, feel free to reach out to me, and you know, I'm happy to speak in more detail about this. I think it's a really interesting time in general in games. And it's definitely not all doom and gloom, even though it kind of feels like that. There is a ton of uncertainty, but I also think there's like a lot to be optimistic about, especially in like the middle-ish term, like in the next like 3 years or so. So yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you. And then this wraps up the conversation series for the
Yeah.
spring. So we will be releasing the next topics for the fall. So
Yeah.
stay tuned.
Stay tuned
Thanks,
for the fall.
everyone.